The action of this manhwa begins with showing us some luxurious Sigma event. We watch as the aristocrats enter one after another. Following the aristocrats, 2 military vehicles arrive, inside of which there are 6 military men who also arrived at this luxurious event. Next, we watch as one of the soldiers gets out of a military vehicle and shows us a close-up of the boots that he bought from AliExpress at a black price. A moment later, we observe who got out of this car. This man was the great Joseph Stalin himself, or his South Korean double.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
Then the action moves inside this luxurious building, and more specifically to the poker table where a game is currently taking place between rich gigasids. Next, one of the guys decides to bet everything he has on the next game and go all in. He is not afraid of losing his dog and his apartment. While Joseph Stalin follows into the main hall where the game is being played right now, everyone around admires the fact that the guy went all in because he already won for the 5th time without it. Meanwhile, while everyone is admiring the poker genius, Stalin begins to make his way through the crowds of people while they are surprised by the appearance of a military man at this event. Next, the military man approaches a guy who in all his appearance resembles a typical Korean idol. Stalin whispers to him that he and a special group have discovered some kind of base in Shanghai. The Korean idol at this time, without looking up from the game, asks the man if this is verified information. The real name of the military man was Major Kawasaki. The Stalin clone continues to whisper, saying that they have already sent their man there who can be trusted, so they have a chance to eliminate the annoying losers who are bothering them. After the poker genius hears this, he even turns away from the table where the game is ongoing and tells Major Kawasaki that this is great news, and if Stalin succeeds, he will receive 1 million yen. After some time, the Korean idol finishes his poker game and says goodbye to all the players. Major Kawasaki wonders where his master is going. Stalin's clone continues to chase a guy with an amazing appearance until the exit, and after the guy leaves the building, he asks him to stop. When the guy with short black hair reaches the car and begins to climb into it, Kawasaki asks his master if they should go together. The guy replies that this is not discussed because these bastards stole more than 10 million won from him, so he is going to catch the last minutes of their lives. The major warns that this is dangerous. However, in response to this warning, the budget Jungkook produces a huge supply of testosterone in order to brutally ask if he looks like someone who is afraid of dangers. This answer was so steeped in coolness that Stalin immediately felt like he had screwed up his warning. In the next moment, Major Kawasaki realizes all his weakness in front of the master and immediately worships him or looks at his brand new boots from AliExpress. Having apologized, Stalin's clone heads to the driver's seat and admits that he was rude, and now they immediately go to the scoundrel to teach them a lesson. At this very moment, Joseph Stalin realizes that he greatly miscalculated because he analyzed his master completely incorrectly. Looking at this guy, he realized that this boy was having fun by betting millions of won. He was clearly a difficult nobleman. He was a real Sigma billionaire. A few moments later, as Major Kawasaki had promised, they immediately moved in a whole pack of cars towards the thieves' destination. They were clearly serious. Having reached his destination, our main character passes by a number of soldiers who salute the gentleman. Suddenly, the guy tells the major that he heard about him as a popular person in this place. However, everything was not so good, because the guy said that he was known as a person who was hated by almost all the people in the area. But filled with determination, the major with a bushy mustache says that he doesn't care at all about the opinions of losers because they are at war. A moment later, the soldier informs the major that they have turned off all communications throughout the entire area on his orders. They also turned off the Genshin Impact servers. Hearing the good execution of a difficult order, Stalin praised his soldiers and told them not to miss a single soul. Next, a dozen soldiers began to do a military walk, while Major Kawasaki ordered them to be cruel and not take prisoners. The distraught Joseph Stalin continued to shout after his soldiers. He shouted that whole rivers of blood of their sworn enemies would be shed that night. The soldiers were inspired by the motivation given to them by their major and rushed forward with their weapons ready, while the major himself remained safe with his master. Our main character appreciated the speech about the rivers of blood of Major Kawasaki. He added that after this speech he was in anticipation of what would happen. Stalin thanked him. Meanwhile, we watch as tactful soldiers from the Sigma 666 battalion surround the building in which their targets are located without creating a single unnecessary noise. After the building is completely surrounded by soldiers a few minutes later, one of the soldiers points to the building and orders the others to proceed to enter. A few moments later, according to the order of one of the soldiers, these Sigmas are already inside the building and are climbing using the stairs. Continuing the route to the space where their targets are located, they increasingly fill the building with themselves. This is an order from the government. This time, a mistake cannot be made. A moment later, we watch as a dozen soldiers reach the room where there should be targets that need to be eliminated by knocking down the door. They are ready to shoot. Without having time to sensibly assess the situation, they order the criminals to stay put on behalf of the Japanese Empire. But instead of people, a projector and a ton of TNT await them. After a couple of moments, these soldiers still realize that they have fallen into a trap, because the entire room was filled with dynamite shells that were about to explode. In less than a few seconds, almost the entire building in which these soldiers were was blown up into the air, because this dynamite explodes at the ideal moment. The soldiers who remained below for very important reasons watching the explosion point their finger at it and understand that the enemy has ambushed them. Meanwhile, we are watching Major Kawasaki and his master. The Major is horrified because he was sure that the base of losers who stole the master's money was here, but they were one step further. However, the surprises do not end there. In addition to the huge explosion, the Sigma 666 battalion suffers another loss because the hidden sniper eliminates another soldier. Despite the fact that nothing is visible due to the huge cloud of black smoke from the explosion, an order to open fire is heard, even despite the fact that their soldiers there are ordered to open fire. But after the sniper continues to shoot, these brave soldiers become cowards and try to retreat despite the Major's orders to continue the attack. Meanwhile, the furious Stalin, taking one of the soldiers by the clothes, shouts to these mediocrities that they are a disgrace because the soldiers of the Japanese army never retreat. While Stalin's clone continues to give orders and shout to the soldiers of the Sigma 666 battalion, our main character continues to coolly observe what is happening standing behind the Major. But a few moments later, another explosion occurs, but this time the epicenter of the explosion is much closer to Major Kawasaki and our main character. The guy with the appearance of a Korean idol does not receive any damage from the explosion, but Comrade Stalin, on the contrary, receives damage and falls to the ground, causing the hero to worry. However, the Major, demonstrating his courage and resilience, gets up after the explosion and tells Mr. Sayoji to leave, which is what our main character is called. Next, this brave man, Major Kowalski, lifts our main character from the ground and tells him, no matter what happens, to be by his side, because he will protect him at any cost. But Sigma does not understand such excessive care. He resists help. Telling the mustachioed one that he does not need help because he is not afraid, Stalin asks him to press his head down and save himself. The Major, despite his position below the master, tells him in an orderly tone that he fulfill his requests, because otherwise he may be injured, and the commander Tojo Hideki will completely kill him. Next, we watch as Comrade Stalin diligently does everything to keep his word and get his master out of the zone where dangerous actions are taking place. After some time, they reach a store. Major Kawasaki immediately tries to do everything in a hurry to get inside. Meanwhile, the gentleman calmly looks around. Immediately after the two of them manage to enter, they enter, and Major Kawasaki works with lightning speed to provide protection from enemy incursions. The guy continues to maintain his cool. After Kawasaki finds the perfect safe position inside the safe, he begins to sigh heavily. He apologizes to the master for having to go through this. This guy is either very stupid or very smart. Like all geniuses, because he still doesn't worry about anything at all, he only asks if they are the only survivors. After this still dubious genius looks around, he declares that they are still not safe because there are a lot of spies around, and he is sure that they are still in danger. General Kawasaki is surprised by his master's stubbornness. Looking at him with surprised eyes, he tells him that they are in a secret bunker prepared for the Japanese army. After the dubious genius decides to look around normally and sees weapons around, he realizes that the bunker is quite good, because it is located under an ordinary toy store. In addition to weapons, this bunker has a device for communication with the outside world, and even its own generator. The Major is currently turning on the generator to request reinforcements. Continuing to start the engine, Kawasaki intends to call the 1st Division here, which will destroy everything here to hell, in which case, no matter what these scoundrels come up with, everything will be useless. Our main character, who is standing behind, asks Stalin if everything is okay with him, because if everything goes on like this, he will not be able to receive the promised reward for the head of Obelgo. Hearing this, Stalin's clone turns sharply and says that this pursuit of his head has already crossed the boundaries of reason, because he will not do this just for the sake of money, even despite the decline in authority. Next, the Major informs his master that he cannot forgive the impudent person who ridicules the Japanese Empire, because if they knew who was hiding behind the position of the head of their opponents. If only the slightest chance were given, then Major Kawasaki would give his life without hesitation for such a chance, because he is ready to do everything for this. Watching the iron and very strong ceilings of the bunker, we hear how our main character, interested, asks the Major if the Major is really so serious. Suddenly, the most unexpected thing that could possibly happen happens. This guy with the appearance of an idol puts his hand pistol to Major Kawasaki's back. The frightened and discouraged clone of Stalin turns to the one whom he diligently protected all the time and asks what is happening and what he is doing. Next, the guy turns on the anti-hero mode and asks the Major if he was waiting for the moment when he would have the chance to kill the head of Obolgo. Continuing to aim the pistol straight at Comrade Stalin's back, the guy declares that the Major's wish has been fulfilled, because right now in front of him is the second head of Obolgo. Comrade Stalin raises his hands and asks the guy to put down the gun, because this joke has already gone on too long. He asks him how he can be the head of Obolgo. At this moment, Major Kawasaki's head began to think. He began to understand that the head of Obelgyo secretly penetrated into the high society of Japan to collect information, and the money he won went to support. A real resonance occurred in the head of Comrade Stalin. He could not believe that all this time he had been defending the head of Obelgo, who used money to promote the independence movement. The Major was clearly not a pushover, because he was not a timid person, and immediately realized that he should show decisiveness at this critical moment. So he reached for his pistol. Stalin's clone went into a rage. He was going to take control of the whole situation, and turning around with a pistol in his hands, he was going to fire a shot to destroy the traitor. A moment after Stalin's sharp turn, a loud shot rang out, which put an end to this confrontation and revealed the winner. However, Major Kawasaki was unable to cope with the upheaval of events, as in the next scene we watch as he falls to his knees having received a serious gunshot wound. Holding his gunshot wound with his hand, Stalin tried to somehow prolong his life. He wondered how such a scoundrel could get to the aristocrats of the empire. Next, the traitor to the great Japanese empire says that he became involved with the aristocracy a long time ago because the son of the first head, who died 27 years ago, is him. Having heard the terrifying truth, Stalin screams in moral and physical pain because he did not understand how this could happen and how this could even be possible. Falling to his knees and continuing to try to stop the loss of blood, tears welled up in the Major's eyes because he was shocked, because all this time he had been sincerely following him. However, this guy was not going to listen to this weak old man. Instead, he walked up to him and pointed a gun at him, saying that he didn't care about anything he said. At this moment, recent events flashed through Major Kawasaki's head about how he said that he doesn't care about authority because they are at war. These memories were the last in the Major's life, because then he extended his hand and with his last breath tried to call this guy a bastard, but he did not have time to finish. The guy looked at the dying Major without showing a drop of emotion. There was absolute composure on his face like any other Sigma. He only told him that they were at war. The new chapter begins with showing us 3 hands and 1 dice. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades threw dice to determine the boundaries between the sky, the sea, and the underworld. Shang Yu and Liu Bang competed in speed to obtain the title of King of Gunzhou. For this, they attacked the Qin capital Xianyang. Next, we observe a bearded man. This man was Dostoevsky. He, driven by debt, wrote Crime and Punishment. In other words, gambling never distinguished people by wealth or status. Gambling also did not bypass East Asia in 1900, where imperialism was blooming and smelling at that moment. Gambling also actively developed there. After all, it was precisely in the territories of East Asia that an incredibly dangerous game of chance was unfolding here and now, a great game that would change the course of world history. Next, the course of events moves to the 8th of June 1909 in Gyeongsang, Resident General of Korea. It is already completely dark and there is absolutely no one on the street. Next, moving inside this residence, we observe a man with gray hair and a mustache who introduces himself as the official representative of Japan, Hayashi Gonsuke. After a few moments, he invites the other 5 big shots to sit down comfortably to begin their meeting today. Next, we watch as one of those sitting takes money out of his bag and bets 50,000 won on the game. This person was Interior Minister Lee Ji-yong. After him, the spherical man laughed, saying that it looked like their Minister of the Interior had nicely prepared for today's game. This plump man was a janitor, a joke, the head of a bank. Next, the pro-Japanese foreign minister Cho Ha-young takes out a whole bunch of money and lays it on the table, saying that since everyone is serious, he also brought a fortune with him. Next, this guy asked if this money belonged to Mr. Sunwoo, because even before the roosters crow at dawn, the whole jackpot will go into this leather bag. Next, the young guy, holding a shot in his hand, says that no matter what happens, it's just a game, because the one who has Lady Fortune on his side wins this game. The plump guy combed his empty head and, looking at the handsome young man, agreed that the one on whose side of fortune wins. But even if so, Sun Wu is lucky too often. However, the chubby guy was interrupted by another man who had been standing all this time. He announced that Sun Wu definitely has outstanding skills that allow him to win. But even despite the excellent playing skills, winning today as perfectly as always will be very difficult, but possible. However, the man with the mustache continued by saying that he said everything that was said earlier, because today, for the sake of victory, they invited a special guest to this game. Next, we watch as two men follow the door, open it, and await the arrival of that same mysterious guest invited to the party. After the mysterious guest arrived, everyone was shocked except for Sigma, who was sitting behind everyone. He did not show a single drop of emotion. After that, the man in a black robe and tied-up hair continued to walk along the room, noticing in passing that everyone was assembled at the meeting today. This guy who just came to the party was His Majesty Duke Sugura, or terribly rich, a womanizer, a schemer, and someone who receives the protection of the state. This man was one of the few influential people in Japan who had good relations with the Privy Council and, of course, with the military itself. Sigma was not happy with the situation that hung in the room after this scoundrel arrived in the room, because he believed that calling him His Highness was too much, because it was sycophancy. Meanwhile, the man who had a thick mustache raised his hand and shouted at the others, ordering them to stand up and show at least a drop of respect. However, this big shot only raised his hand to signal the man to stop. He said that there was no need to comply with formalities because he was just one of the giga-chads. Meanwhile, a plump guy with blonde hair was surprised that this guy got here without even saying a word. He replied that for him it was nothing special because he had heard rumors that he could meet a great player here. Suddenly, this guy activated his predator gaze. He looked at someone and added that in addition to meeting with the great player, he had some work to do. For some reason, when looking at this guy, I felt an energy that made me shiver, as if the red wolf hiding by the pond was a gloomy and cruel person. Continuing to drink his shot, the guy with a hairstyle just like Jungkook's understood that this guy was the true face of dark energy. He felt something similar a few days ago. After a while, this snickering guy, shaking the ashes into the ashtray, asked the player opposite if he was the best player in Joseon. A few moments later, our main character replied that it's difficult to call him the best, but he can definitely call himself a fan of such games, but nothing more. However, this aristocrat did not believe the words of our protagonist, because every night he stripped them to the last thread. They say because of this, many Japanese aristocrats are on the verge of bankruptcy. However, in response to these accusations, the guy, continuing to hold his shot, only laughed, saying that these human rumors are simply merciless and are free to come up with anything. The high-level aristocrat laughed and told the guy not to take it all into his head. In addition, he added that he had never lost in gambling. After this, the rich aristocrat snapped his fingers, thereby calling his slave to perform a very difficult task and take out the money from the bag. A moment later, the servant copes with this difficult task and lays out stacks of money straight from the bag directly onto the table. On the table, there are 6 packs of bills in denominations of 500, 300,000 won. If you add them to what you have, it turns out to be 900,000 won. Everyone around was simply shocked by such a huge bet for such a huge amount, and besides, this was only this guy's first game in this circle. Next, that same bald, plump guy with blonde hair took out a deck of cards and invited everyone to announce today's game as poker, in honor of the arrival of Duke Sugura. Skillfully shuffling a deck of cards, the Duke stated that he usually plays mahjong for fun, but he heard that Sigma has outstanding abilities in skill games, so he decided to show his talent in a fight. Continuing to skillfully shuffle the cards, this guy said that he was very eager to see if the rumors were true, that the guy opposite him was simply an incredible poker player. At this moment, our main character was watching the movements of his new opponent's hands. Looking at them, he realized that they were calm, skillful, impeccable, like a magician's. After this budget, Ghetto from the magical battle finished shuffling the deck. He placed it on the table with a powerful movement of his hand and offered to play poker. Next, our main character, looking at the cards, told him that he had good ones. He reinforced his words by assuring his opponent that he knew a lot about this. Meanwhile, the guy was surprised and asked what, in his opinion, are good cards. Asking this question, he patiently waited for an answer. Our main character grinned and answered with a question. Isn't the card that brings a crushing victory over the enemy a good one? There was a real battle of wits between them before the game. After this deep and philosophical thought at some point about the cards of our main character, Geto lit a cigarette and said that, apparently, the rumors did not lie to him. Next, the servant goes to our main character. Approaching him, he puts a sheet in front of him and tells him that today's rules are in front of him. After two men from the servants hand out papers to all the participants in the game that is about to begin, one of the servants says that these are the rules and they need to agree before starting to play. Our main character was dissatisfied with such a ridiculous start to the game. He understood that this was the very meticulous Japanese imperialism, because they always use the document when they find themselves in a disadvantageous position. Looking through the eyes of a hunter at this document that caused inconvenience to our main character, he thought that it was quite possible that in the future they would declare that there was no exploitation or expropriation. While everyone who read the rules agreed with them, saying that there was nothing superfluous in them, they held out wads of money, and our Sigma decided that he would use his meticulousness to tie their hands and feet. When the servants watching the game saw that all the participants in the meeting agreed to play according to the rules provided, the Duke suggested starting the game. As soon as the game began, everyone began to look at their cards and tried to remain indifferent so as not to let anyone understand what was in their hearts. One of the men with a thick mustache thought that if he carried on a conversation, it would not be clear what cards he had. So he asked His Highness what his first impression of Joseon was. Hearing the question, the Duke answered almost without hesitation by saying that this city seemed quite quiet to him, but the sound of the cicadas that seeped through the rocks did not leave him. The Duke continued by saying that this meant that in a country that did not pose much danger, there was cause for concern. But the cicadas could only be out for 2 weeks, which was not long. Our main character Sigma continued by saying that it would be wiser to listen to the loud singing of nightingales in the forest, because you can set up a net and lie down to rest under a thatched house. Hearing the proposal of our main character, this bastard laughed because they are all talking about the nightingale who simply flies to the earth, but cannot settle on it and flies away. However, these birds still had one very important advantage, because these singing nightingales catch and eat annoying and terrible cicadas. Despite the rude answer, Sigma remained calm and replied that even despite being eaten by nightingales, they reappear every summer until they lose hope. Next, a man with gray hair and a mustache who sits next to the Duke tells him that he mentioned work. Let him tell about it. He replies that he is on the eve of His Majesty's official visit. Hearing such an answer, the man who asked the question was surprised and asked if he was accidentally talking about a new folk society. The man then raised his bet by another 3,000 won, and he also encouraged the others to continue betting another 6,000 if they wanted to. At this time, our main character with the appearance of a Korean idol scoffs because this all looks like tyranny, because they ask him to pay 6,000 for one piece of paper the size of his palm. But if this was the condition of the Duke himself, then he is simply obliged to follow it. In the next frame, we watch how the hero raises his bet. Next, the Duke turns to a man with gray hair and asks him if he has heard of Obelgo. The same one replies that it is a bridge made of fish and a turtle. The Duke doesn't even pay attention to this idiotic answer. He begins to say that they are under the illusion that the people will support Joseon. There were rumors that they were buying a huge amount of weapons to build an army. Once again raising the ante, the Duke declares that this whole thing is a strange thing, isn't it? Because building an army costs a lot of money, so where do Obelge get this money? Having finished our sentence, we understand that it is the Duke who suspects our main character who earns millions. He asks him if he thinks the same. However, the guy, who doesn't show his face at all, replies that he has no idea because he is a simple man and he never thought so deeply about such things. But he could ask what the hell card the Duke could use to donate 10,000. But he didn't want to think, or pretended that he didn't want to, which is why he threw another stack of bills with the size of 10,000 and said that he too was raising the bet after the Duke. After this moment, everyone dealt their cards and asked for a check. Everyone had excuses that the card didn't work, and you just need to watch and play too risky. At this point, absolutely everyone except two left the game, so the game continued between our main character and the Duke, who wanted to test whether he really was the best in Joseon. Looking at his cards, the Duke assumes that during all this time in Joseon, his opponent has learned a lot from here. Our main character replies that there have been as many victories as losses, and in the last few years he has become so addicted to games that he cannot part with them. Suddenly something strange happens. The Duke does not have the patience to continue this conversation and games, and he hits the table with all his might. The enraged Duke begins to yell at the guy telling him to stop lying, because he knows that he received a special report, and all he did was win. He asked where he spent such huge money. The guy, even at this tense moment, continues to be calm as a river under the moon. He replies that in order to spend money properly, there must be a lot of it. a Genshin Impact premium account, gourmet dishes, good wine in a golden thicket, and so on. Then the Duke comes to his senses a little and asks if this means that the guy is going to focus only on games without doing other things. This unbalanced Duke throws another 30,000 won on the table. He says that this is all great and now he will test his courage. At this time, Sigma lights a cigarette. Everyone around was discouraged by this move, because for these simpletons, a sharp increase in the bet only meant that he had a winning card and he knew what he was doing. The main character for the first time shows a drop of emotion by raising his hands and smiling. He laughs because the Japanese aristocrat really easily throws away 30,000, and the rootless man of Joseon is trembling all over. Then, for the first time in the entire game, our main character turns on his critical thinking. He understands that the only thing that catches his eye is the ace of clubs. But there is no way to make a straight or flush. These cards are not worth 30,000. The Duke continues to try to get our main character emotional. He tells him if he is scared, then it is better to fold his cards and give up. In a previously lost battle, throwing yourself recklessly is not courage. Suddenly our main character says that, as in the case of the greeting, he intends to follow his words without reservation. After this, another pack is sent to the table, and the Duke clearly no longer understands who he is sitting with at the table and what is happening around him. Then the Duke replies that he is taking it. Everyone immediately jumped up and told the Duke that he couldn't attack because they didn't even check each other's cards, but the Duke told Sigma to take the money. Looking at the money, the old man thought that perhaps right now, right before his eyes, a perfect bluff took place during this game, which won the game for our main character. The old man abruptly sits down in his seat, and in his thoughts understands that this bluff of our main character, who bet 30,000 with only one ace, is amazing. He was amazed by these two. But Sigma seemed to know that he would hit a big jackpot. Crossing his fingers and looking at our main character, the Duke said that this game would probably be enough for a greeting. Next time he intends to show a real game. Next, the Duke pays attention to the piece of wood that our main character has been holding since the very beginning of the game. He asks what kind of piece of wood it is. He even admits that it is a magical object. The guy says that about 2,000 years ago in China, there was a competition. One might say it was a place in which the god of luck determined a loved one. It was a sign given to the one who took first place. Budget Gato from the Magic Battle thought about the thing given 2,000 years ago. He was surprised that a thing made of wood could last more than 2,000 years. Next, our main character grinned and told the Duke that he shouldn't take the word of the drunken player's ravings because it makes little sense. But the Duke was clearly interested in this story about this thing. The next moment he pointed his finger at this thing and said that he was going to buy it. He told him to name any price for it. But the guy replied that, unlike Li Jiyang, he was not used to selling what belongs only to him. The same Li Jiyang clearly tensed from such a not very kind reminder. Japanese Jungkook continues by saying, if it is the Duke's greed, then today he will have to win the game to get what he wants. Having heard such a profitable offer, the Duke easily organizes another game. The first bets are already on the table. Everyone is ready to start a new game. Suddenly, two loud knocks are heard on the door behind the Duke. Budgetary Gyoto, without even turning around, tells the person who knocked on the door to go inside. Next, we again observe in close-up the boots purchased from Taobao. The soldier asks for forgiveness for his lateness. He declares to His Majesty that urgent public matters have arisen. Gyoto asks if this is the reason he stinks of blood. The soldier replies that on the eve of the visit of His Majesty Prince Joseon, 2 members of Obelgyo were caught preparing a daring conspiracy for which they were executed on the spot. Hearing such sudden and terrifying news, everyone around turns towards the soldier and is surprised. But our Sigma, as always, remains indifferent and composure. However, for this Duke, it's more of an everyday thing. He says that these annoying obuljis have again flocked like moths to a flame. He asks if they said anything in the end. The soldier gave a positive answer, after which he leaned towards his master to whisper what the members of the Obelgyo group confessed to. Next, the Duke specifically loudly asks whether it was with this katana that he ended the lives of those 2 scoundrels. The soldier replies that if the master wants it, he can demonstrate it. This Duke still can't keep up with our main character after the officer's phrase. He turns to the hero and asks him, as the best player, if he's shaking and if he's scared. However, after this pathetic attempt to scare, our main character smiles, closing his eyes, and asks what, in the Duke's opinion, he should have been afraid of. While the guy with the Taobao boot slowly and pathetically puts his katana into its sheath, he does not take his eyes off our main character. The Hekrog at this time says that people are full of fears. Next, our main character came up with a brilliant line. He told His Highness that for a player in a game to draw cards and make a bet is no different from playing the main role. Moreover, every moment you feel the trembling from the fact that everything is at stake, and the person who walks along the blade will never falter due to the gusty wind. The Duke, humiliated by words, says that only his word is worth dragging him to the place of execution. Maybe the sword will cut his throat. Everything is determined by the list of crimes. Next, the Duke makes direct accusations to our main character. Because he is sure that the guy supports Obelge with his money, the old man convinces the Duke that the man was checked before joining. However, the Duke immediately shut the mouth of the old man, who tried to convince him of the innocence of our protagonist, after which all the Japanese and Koreans who were in the room began to tremble with fear. However, our main character was still calm. He asked if they wanted to kill him because they trampled his pride as a poker player, because it was too much for him to have such feelings. Holding his hand on a whole pile of money, the guy continued saying if they act like this without any physical evidence, they will only seem like a petty person. The guy finished his speech by saying whether everything would be all right if the man who became the Duke of the Japanese Empire received such a reputation. But the Duke threw his hands aside and asked if he looked like someone who would care about such things. Sigma Hunter continued the beating with facts. He continued saying that it is not money that hurts the soul, but the fact that the Duke was defeated. Because an entertaining story will come out of how an officer committed a massacre at the gaming table out of resentment. The Duke, in response to this, shaking his head, called the remarks of our protagonist a strange way of praying for the preservation of life. He would not have been surprised if he had rushed at me, thinking about his comrades. Next, the Duke turns on the serious mode and turns off the clown and asks, looking intently at the best player in Joseon, whether he is a coward or just very arrogant. The guy replied that rumors do not bother him, because everyone himself determines the place in which he will fight for his life, and his battlefield is at the gaming table. Throwing a pack on the table and thereby making a bet, the guy says that in addition to the fact that poker is his battlefield, it is also his weapon. Budget Ghetto also threw a wad of money into the middle of the table. He said since it is connected to the gaming table, then it will not determine victory or defeat. An intense game began. Most likely not only money was at stake, but also reputation and life itself. Meanwhile, there was one pair and a king on the table. This is already a full house with kings, and the guy had 2 kings in his hand. Based on this, the best poker player concluded that whatever card his opponent had, it was a simple flush. That is, a win-win fight. However, the silence and critical thinking of our protagonist are interrupted, and the Duke suddenly says that he has a feeling deep down in his soul that he cannot win. Next, the crazy Duke points to his head, which is hardly filled with smart thoughts. He continues his remark by saying that Sigma in front of him will not win with his head. Not by force. Then this weakling guy looks at the officer who has been standing next to him all this time and is ready to start a bloody massacre at any moment. The Duke wanted to continue the phrase that he would not win even with money, but as he reached for the money, he realized that he entered this room with 300,000, but at some point only 30,000 remained. Next, the poker genius catches the guy finishing his sentence abruptly. He asks if he has too many such loud dreams. He realized that his opponent received a good card. For the first time that evening, the Duke was trapped in mind games. The smug smile immediately disappeared from his face. He understood that a player without money was nothing more than an onlooker. This guy clearly had an abusive relationship with the table, because he then jumped up from his seat and hit the table, saying that he would write an IOU in order to continue playing. The Duke, looking at the plump guy with a receding hairline, said that he would borrow 1 million and would pay 1% per day. The fat guy immediately gave the debt. Next, the guy picks up a document with the rules that the Duke himself brought to this office. He read Article 5, Paragraph 1, which stated that you can only bet at the beginning of the round with money that is on the table. The guy turned the entire course of their battle by using his opponent's mistake in concluding the rules, because no matter how soon he borrows money, they can only be used from the next round. Then a malicious smile appeared on the face of our main character. He looked straight at the Duke and, pondering his deplorable situation, called it very annoying. The Duke was able to pull himself together. He was wondering what to do. He asked the best Joseon player, because he was going to bet a lot on this game. Meanwhile, our main character was spinning that very piece of wood that had a rich history, drinking beer or something more expensive. He asked what to do with it. Next, the Duke decided that he could make do with a promise instead of a bet. He promised Sigma that if he won this bet, he would save his life for once, and for a few days would forget about the fact that he was sponsoring the Obelgo military. And also if he wins, he will take the entire bank today, including the one he borrowed today in the amount of 1 million won, but then he must disappear without catching his eye. Or in other words, this guy with long collected hair gave our main character a chance to make his plan for the future and save his life. Raising his glass of drink, the best Joseon player asked the Duke what deal he expected in turn. He demanded that if he wins, he gives him the sign of the world player and admits his defeat in front of everyone, because even in this case, he is ready to spare his life if he sincerely asks. The guy was very surprised by such a strange request, because he didn't know that this decrepit stick with some kind of history was worth more than his own life. Meanwhile, the Duke continued holding a cigarette in his hands that he would also write him a pardon for a week. If he wins, he can leave with the document and this document. The guy, closing his eyes and continuing to sip his drink as if nothing had happened, he should stop all of it. And such a piece of paper and the like is unlikely to convince the Japanese soldier. Next, we watch as that same Japanese soldier continues to stand ready to present our main character with a pizza that needs to be cut. The Duke asked what the guy wants in case of victory. The guy demanded from the Duke that when Mr. Duke sits down for this game, their promise comes into force, because this is a stronger and more definite proof than a distinctive sign. The Duke fell silent at first when he heard the demand, because he did not expect to hear so few requests. He asked the best poker player if this would be enough for him. The guy said that the noble gentleman probably knows the story of Liu Bang and Xiang Yu. In the open big game for King Guanzhong, it was not Xiang Yu who won, but Liu Bang. All the people sitting in the room suspected something, but listened to Song Wu He. Next, it was the Duke who decided to raise the bet by betting another 100,000 of the million borrowed from Kubota. He did not give up the king's place. The agreement was violated by force. Then Song Wu He raised the bet by another 200,000 won. Everyone around, watching this perhaps the most intense game, watched with bated breath because the price that Xiang Yu paid went down in history. Indeed, in history, the same great commander who had enough power to turn the world over found himself in a hopeless situation and was forced to leave the world of the living personally. During the invasion of Sanyang, no one could have predicted that Xiang Yu would suffer such a crushing defeat in the future. At this moment, as if in opposition to choosing and following contrary to the law of the world, a huge catastrophe broke out. Meanwhile, the last game card was thrown onto the table. This card was supposed to decide who won this confrontation. Everyone around held their breath. Next, the Duke asked why our main character told this story. He asked, pointing at him with his finger, if he was threatening him. He asked if he wanted to say that if he breaks his promise, he will follow the unsuccessful path of Xiang Yu. However, the best poker player explained that he was simply telling an entertaining story that should always be remembered by those who understand filial piety. There is a rule at the gaming table that should never be broken. This rule is that the results of the game are accepted immediately. If the god of luck gets angry, then his rage will be long and persistent and cannot be avoided by any means. Meanwhile, the guy looked at his card and saw that he had come across an excellent card that would form a combo that would allow him to win. After he saw the card, he immediately turned away. Looking somewhere to the side, he asked his opponent to stop talking nonsense. It's better to bet on money because he is a man of his word. Apparently, our protagonist of the poker gig also had a great plan in mind. Most likely, he had extraordinary talent, so he was calm in advance. A moment later, we watch as our main character places on the table all the money he has earned this evening. He says that from the very beginning, there is victory or defeat, so there is no need to delay it. Suddenly, the Duke immediately picks up the wave of adrenaline that our main character released. He also puts everything he has on the table. He says that this is exactly what he wanted. Everyone around was shocked again, but this time much stronger than the previous times because these two psychopaths put everything they could on the line. They weren't even sure if their cards were worth it. Next, Budget Gyoto looked at our main character like a madman and said that unfortunately for the best player in Joseon, everything is over because he wins. Next, he unfolds his cards and shows them to our main character. He says that it's all over because he has a square of kings. The Duke once again jumps up from his seat and shouts for our main character to take a bite, because this is the power and dignity of the imperial family. Truly a subject for praising the great empire, this is exactly what everyone thought of the Duke. However, our main character even at this moment remained calm. After lighting a cigarette, he asked the Duke if it would be wiser to look at the cards in his hand before rejoicing so much. The Duke, distraught with joy, points his finger at our protagonist and tells him that bluffing in this case is useless. Because this is his club flush, he may have brought it to perfection, but it cannot be compared with 4 kings. The guy picks up one of his cards and repeats that he has already said one wise thing. The fact that a good carrot in poker is the one that beats the opponent's card. No more, no less. After this, our main character places his cards on the table and says that apparently when he spoke this wisdom, he did not listen to his words at all. The next moment, the guy turns over another card, and the fourth ace appears on it, which means that a deck of 4 aces is formed in the guy's hand. This guy couldn't even imagine that this could happen, that someone would throw such a combo at such a moment in the game. He couldn't believe it. Putting his hands on the table, the guy tried to catch his breath. He couldn't believe that all this time the genius had been fooling him around his finger. I had cards in my hands that were only 1 rank higher than his cards. He was sure that these were inhuman skills. Next, our main character, as if nothing had happened, packs his things into a suitcase and puts on his gentleman's cap and says that there are many people in the world who claim that they are kings, but not everyone can take the throne. After a couple of moments, our main character, having collected his things, leaves and walks right next to the Duke whom he beat a couple of minutes ago. In the end, he only says that we had a lot of fun. When our main moment is almost gone, it is only at this moment that the Duke realizes that the machinations of this genius were so refined that they were not even noticed by Hayashi or Kubota. But this bastard Duke was also not much different. He managed to give a sign to his officers without even saying anything. The soldier who stood next to the Duke all the time immediately realized that he had been assigned. Next, the course of events moves on the street and we watch as our main character is stopped by 3 police officers of the great Japanese army. One of the soldiers, heading towards our main character, asks how he dared to treat their master in such a disdainful tone because he committed a terribly serious sin that they cannot tolerate. Meanwhile, our protagonist's hands are wringing and he, in turn, says that they are just dogs who do not understand human words. He asks if they have heard about the contract that he concluded with their master. Next, the money from our protagonist's suitcase spills out onto the ground, and the officers accuse the guy of acting arrogantly at the table, pretending to see right through everyone. But he had no idea how his life would change for this. These officers assured our main character that he could not even imagine what they would do to him now for treating their master this way. Even at this moment, our main character smiles and asks the officer who is conducting the interrogation if he really thinks that he had no idea about anything. However, due to a lack of intelligence, this officer, instead of continuing the dialogue, strikes with his blade directly at the guy's chest and tells him to close his mouth and not speak. After such a serious wound with a cold weapon, the guy falls to the floor and does not understand how this happened, because today's game was supposed to be a success. Next, we observe the same piece of wood that our main character Song Woo Hui was carrying all the time. A quiet but distinct sound was heard from the piece of wood. This quiet sound meant that the god of luck was angry. The end of the divine object that had not changed for 2,000 years was split into pieces, and the filial piety engraved on it was distorted. Song Woo Hui, lying on the ground in blood, looked at that very piece of wood and realized that he had achieved what he had in mind. He smiled, because watching how the gambling of his whole life sowed the seeds of success, the artifact gave a reaction. There is nothing to be done about the fact that he failed to properly pass on the family heirloom to the heir, but this is 1,000, no 10,000 times better than not having a country that could be passed on by inheritance. After the commander of the officers picked up the very piece of wood that changed its appearance, lightning rang out behind him, and that's how the ancient dice became consumed by Sugura's passionate desire. The course of events is interrupted and we are transported a full 18 years forward to the late spring of 1927. In the city of Songdo, a whole bunch of workers are working tirelessly at some construction site. Next, we observe how a worker drinks a large container of water due to a hot day. All workers were united by the fact that they wore white armbands. After this guy who seemed thin drank a container of water while sitting on a bench, he smiled and said that now he could continue to live. Looking at his colleagues, the guy understood that Joseon laborers were dying, so that the Japanese could enjoy the summer, damn them. However, this worker is interrupted by some guy saying that they are not shedding sweat for the sake of the Japanese. The guy looked back to see who interrupted him. The one who interrupted the man was a guy with a model appearance. He said that they work for the sake of their families, even knowing that it is annoying and unfair. People cannot do anything because their larynx is constrained by hunger. The worker admitted that in some aspects Sun Woo Jin is right, but even working tirelessly, he ends up with about 121 a day, so it can be called volunteering and not work. And even if you add night shifts to daytime work, the situation doesn't get much better. Meanwhile, the guy with black hair is also filling a wooden container with water. As we watch the guy greedily drink water, the worker says that even with night shifts, even his salary would be less than 41. The worker rubs his chin and understands that he needs to hit the jackpot quickly in order to leave this unbearable sight. But this guy rarely reveals his cards. The guy asked if the worker had visited the gaming house. The worker replies that he visited a gaming house. If you go into a brothel alley, you can find many good places where you can make money. The man continues his speech by saying that if you believe the rumors, then in some places a large amount is exchanged in just one round, which amounts to almost several thousand won. But in something like this, you need to win. Next, the man opens his eye and, looking at the guy, asks him with a serious look whether he is involved in gambling or selling Genshin Impact accounts. The guy immediately raises his hand and assures the worker that he does not do this and is not interested in this. The man gets up and puts his hand on the guy's shoulder and says that this is nice because you need to strike while the iron is hot. He asks the guy how he views learning to play after the end of the working day. The guy replies that he has no desire to visit such places. However, the man continues to persuade the guy to play because today is payday, which means that the doors of the gaming house are open and waiting for visitors. He added that he can play whatever he wants. Having heard a wide variety of games, the guy was surprised that there could be a gambling house in such a brothel area. He was clearly interested when he heard this. A moment later, a loud ringing sound was heard from the bell, which notified the workers that their workday was coming to an end and they could leave their jobs. Immediately after this, we watch a crowd of sweaty men enter a building that apparently serves as their shower room. Then all the workers come up to this guy with the appearance of a BTS member. He gives each worker some kind of thing. The grandfather says that today is payday. He asks if the calculations are finished. The guy tells the old man that the calculation is really over, but he added that his grandfather's cough is getting worse, so he thinks that he should take a rest, at least for a while. Hearing this, the grandfather puts his hand on his chin and says that he is far from resting because he needs to feed 6 mouths at home, because even after daily work they say that they are hungry. Then this grandfather continues to follow to the shower compartment. He is looking forward to the moment when a penny will finally fall on him from somewhere. The guy with black hair probably feels sorry for his grandfather. Due to the fact that the guy was lost in thought, he did not notice at all how Mr. Pansu approached him, who was in a hurry, saying that he was in a hurry. He asked for forgiveness. The guy is so experienced in his work that he takes out the sign of the required worker. Even despite 100 signs that are on his left hand, one of the workers asks how he does it. Despite the clear question, the guy asks the worker what he means and asks him to repeat his question. The worker points to a shelf in which there are hundreds of cells, in each of which is the sign of each worker. He asks how he immediately took out his sign without even looking closely. He saw him do it many times, but did not see him make a mistake. After everyone around them understood what the worker meant, they began to say that this man was indeed a real god. Another person suggested that he had supernatural powers. Interesting theories continued to flow from the lips of the workers. Someone called him a shaman, someone Sigma. Someone even asked him to use his powers to tell him when his torment would end and a holiday would happen. The guy raises his hands and begins to assure the workers that he has no powers. The fact is that he just remembers where he put each sign. After working for several days, he quickly realized what was what. However, the workers continued to ask questions because there were a lot of places for cards and it is not possible to remember all the places. The guy scratches his head and says that he doesn't think that this is a talent that deserves admiration. The next theory that comes from the lips of the employees is that the students who previously went to a regular high school are very different. The new education is a different story. They are probably being taught everything. Next, we watch in close-up as some red car arrives at the scene of action. It's certainly not a Ferrari, but at this time it's probably a luxury car. A thin man with glasses gets out of the car, and behind him there are 2 big guys who, apparently, act as his guard. With his appearance, he announces that Mitsui's gambling house is in place. He further announces that today's game will not be Roblox, but Chinchiroran. This is a gambling game in which 3 dice are placed in a cylinder-shaped tube, and then the numbers that fall out are guessed. This game gets its name from the sound produced by shaking 3 dice, which is reminiscent of the sound made by Japanese crickets. Next, the guy rolls his eyes that the result of this game is obvious, but he works the night shift until 10 o'clock, so he needs to keep his place. Meanwhile, the thin old man begins the game that I previously described. He hits the cylinder on the ground, and inside there are 3 dice. The workers really like to spend their earned money on this game. One bets that there is something strong there, the other bets that there is an odd number inside and bets 1-1. After the flow of bets has stopped, the host of the gambling house asks if everyone has decided, because now they will find out who won and who lost. After this thin old man lifts the cylinder, we watch as the numbers 2, 1, and 4 fall out, which add up to 7, that is, an odd number. If the results of this game were decided simply by even or odd numbers, then there would be an equal number of winners and there would be less meaning in this game. However, this time these cases are provided for, because this variation of this gambling game has several exceptions. so this does not happen and the game does not continue indefinitely. Indeed, in the rules of this game, when a combination of numbers 4, 5, 6 comes up, or the dice have the same number of dots on them, then the gambling house takes all the money bet. But if, in the event of a roll of the dice, 1, 2, and 3 appear, then on the contrary, the gambling house wins an unconditional defeat. All the outcomes of the rolls are recorded by a guy with black hair. The sum of the numbers is 12, he got dice with a 6, a 4, and a 2 on them, and he just rolled as a joke, but it worked. We watch as this guy diligently tries to improve his instinct. After several months of diligent practice, this genius guy's instinct has improved significantly. Even though this guy did not specialize in chincharoran, he thought that if he intervened, he would undoubtedly win. This jackpot was the size of his pay for 3 months. However, the guy was sure that he had to restrain himself, because if he did it again, like in his past, he would be punished. Like his teacher did, he threatened him if he caught him within a year, then he would be finished. But this guy simply could not take his eyes off the process of this game. He really wanted to intervene and win a fortune without much difficulty. He again talked himself out of this idea, because if he intervened, some aristocrat might suddenly appear who would immediately start making jokes. Next, we watch a mega-detailed guide of what happens when at the very end of the throw, there is a dull sound in the cylinder. This means that one of the bones is on the corner and rests on the wall of the cylinder. After this, we watch as the gambling house master, with a joyful face, lifts the cylinder to see which dice have fallen out. All the workers around were perplexed that after the throw for the second time in a row, the numbers came up 4, 5, 6. They could not believe their eyes. This was the end for their bets. Watching the game, the guy with black hair understood that if he interfered and was caught, then he wouldn't be able to breathe fresh air for a whole year, and he would have a lot of problems. After a few throws, we watch as only 3 people remain at the game. The gambling master and 2 workers. The situation is heating up. They are encouraged to work as hard as possible and earn money. The gambling master tells the 2 remaining laborers that they can stop already, because they won't even be able to drink 1 bowl of makgeolli. However, these 2 workers had no time for talking. They told the gambling master to stop talking and throw the dice faster. They were looking forward to seeing the values of the dice that fell out. They also accused the gambling house of being able to escape, to which the master replied that this was nonsense and Mutsu's gambling house does not escape. He continued by saying if they still have money, they can still play. Next, this thin man once again puts 3 dice into the cylinder and with a powerful swing directs it straight into the ground. But somehow 4 threes appear, which leaves a total of 12. But the presence of identical numbers means that the gambling house has won and takes the money. Next, the man raises and asks if there are still anyone interested. He also says that they should not spread rumors that the gambling house takes the money for itself and runs away. Because if there are anyone interested, let them come. But if there are no people willing to play, then there is no point in him staying here because he wants to go home to play Fortnite or back to the gambling house. After he collected his rug on which he was sitting, he asked the handyman not to be upset because he will definitely return next month when they receive their salary. This thin man in glasses with his strong guards is about to leave, but someone throws several bills on the floor and asks them to stop. However, he is the master of the gambling house and asks him to stop because 21 will not be enough for him to turn everything around again in order to play. So he leaves and hopes that they will see each other again. However, this Sigma uses the manipulation skills that he watched on YouTube. He asks if he is afraid of the Joseon man with 21 and if that is why he is running away. At first glance, his provocation works, and we watch as the master of the gambling house stops, saying that he did not say that he was running away. Having heard this answer, the guy tells the master that in this case, let him throw the dice so that the game begins, and he would show who the daddy is. In response to such impudence, one of the big guys takes out his sword and asks the tramp what he is doing, because he is a second-class citizen. He says that the representative has already said that he is leaving, so he better stop. This guy continued to beat with facts. He sharply replied that he did not know that making money in a gambling house is considered arbitrary even for them. After the brainless big man points his sword at the guy, the handsome guy replies that if his hands are really itching, then let him try. But it's worth considering that it won't be pleasant if a rumor appears that a man was killed in a gambling house. Next, this chained dog is stopped by his thin owner who tells him that he will deal with him himself. If it makes it easier for him to lose all his pennies, then he will help him with this. Looking at our main character, this guy tried to pretend to be a hunter, saying that they would do as he wanted, but it still wouldn't take much time. A worker we knew earlier approached the guy and asked if everything was okay, because he said that he didn't know how to play. The guy replied that he would just try once, even if he lost, it would only be 21. The gambling house master at this time, completely confident in his abilities, declares that he has never opened a game because of a measly 21 bill. Some time passes, and we watch as the gambling house master finally arranged everything necessary, and the game was ready to begin. In a few moments, the game will begin. The gambling house master puts the dice in the cylinder and mixes them thoroughly, asks the guy if he is ready to start. Even in a tiny moment, at the moment of placing the cylinder on the ground, our main character manages to see some bones that are inside this cylinder. Having placed the cylinder on the ground, a thin man with a smile on his face asks the guy how much and what he is betting his measly money on. The guy takes out his 21 and decides to bet everything he has on the fact that there is an amount inside the cylinder that will be even. The whole crowd immediately jumps up from such a sharp decision. They try to convince him that there were 2 2s and a 3 in the cylinder, but the other says that it is impossible to see and should not listen to him. The cold-blooded Gigachad tells the gambling house master to quickly remove the cylinder so that everyone here can see what kind of dice have fallen. The cylinder has not even been raised yet, but the guy, using critical thinking, understands that inside 100% there are 1, 4, and 5, and their sum is 10. That is, even, as he said. A few moments later, the gambling house master raises the cylinder, and after everyone has seen the result, they are shocked and do not understand how this happened. Immediately after the workers, we, the audience, are watching the dice. The dice were perfectly accurately predicted by our main character. He wins this bet. After this victory, everyone begins to encourage our main character, saying that he did a good job, but the others ask to be quiet so as not to jinx him. However, everything didn't happen exactly according to plan because he wanted 4, 5, and 6 to come up in order to earn more. Well, earning 21 was also good. After the outcome of the first throw became known, the gambling house master took out his wallet and reached for the money to pay the client. He did not expect the guy to win. However, the game did not end there. The master asked our main character what his next number would be. The guy was looking forward to the next roll of the dice. This time, during this throw, our main character relied not on his sight but on his hearing. He listened carefully to the bounce of the dice in the cylinder. After listening, he realized that inside there were dice with numbers 1, 3, and 4. He had practiced so much that he was confident in his prediction. A moment later, even before the cylinder touched the ground, the guy realized that the sum of the dice would be 8, which meant that he should have gotten the value 8. But after some time, according to the hearing of our main character, the value on the dice changed to 2 6s and a 2. It was still necessary to bet on even, because it came out to 14. After the representative of the gambling house placed the cylinder on the ground and was waiting for our protagonist to bet, the guy showed all the 41 that he had and bet on an odd number. A moment later, we watched the cylinder rise and we observed the values 1, 2, 4, which meant that another bet was won by our main character. The laborers around were simply discouraged by the fact that a guy who plays only for the first time wins twice in a row, and for these 2 times he receives 81. However, the gambling master was more biased. He believed that everything that happens is just beginner's luck, and if this continues, then at 4, 5, and 6 he will kneel because he will win the house. Next, the gambling representative pretended that he was not angry at all. He laughed and said that this guy was very lucky to get caught. This guy apparently watched videos on YouTube about how cool it is to answer, because he said that it's possible that he's not the lucky one, but that the master of the gambling house has terrible skills. This thin man with glasses only cheered up these words. He told the guy that he doubted that he would be able to repeat these words after this game. Due to the fact that our main character managed to provoke the representative of the gambling house, he began to shake the dice with all his anger, because no matter what the opponent, you just need to throw the dice as best as possible to make 4, 5, 6. After all then, regardless of what the player bet on, the gambling house can unconditionally take the money. For this, it is enough to do this once out of 10. A moment later, we watch as the gambling master made a throw with all his anger and expected a bet from our main character, who had previously smashed him. The guy puts down all the 81 he earned and says that he bets all his money on odds. At this moment, even the gambling master begins to suspect this guy. He notices that there is something wrong with this guy. Why does he call the bet so confidently? There is not even a shadow of doubt in him. The next moment, we see the values on the dice. 1, 3, 5. The value is again odd, as our main character said, which means that he wins the bet again. Further, our main character continues to win over and over again. At the moment, he has won the bet 6 times in a row. His current bet is estimated at 1281. The gambling house master from this moment begins to get very worried, because this guy continues to bet on everything and wins. He has never seen such an obsessed player as this guy. He is not completely stupid and understands that guessing the bet 6 times is not just luck, but the dice were brought from a gambling house. The problem is definitely not in them. It is impossible to cheat. The master understands that if this continues, after 3 more games this guy will have 10,000 won, and this will be enough to pay 300 port workers, then he will have to do anything to crush the kid. The rolls continue to be rolled and the dice are constantly predicted, but something strange happened on this throw that puzzled our main character. Relying on his ears, the guy heard some dull and unclear sound. He realized that tricks were being used with the help of which the master wanted to get his money back. The guy had such a high intelligence that he even understood what his trick would be. He realized that he was going to control the bone that would stand on the edge against the wall. Our main character understands that with the help of this trick, he will be able to turn the dice to the left or right at the right moment by adjusting the dice in the opposite direction to his bet. After this thin and angry man made a throw with a trick, he looked with anger at the guy who was ruining his capital and told him to bet. However, the guy remained calm. He was sure that this scoundrel had deliberately used his technique, which allowed him to quietly change the value of the dice. Using critical thinking, Sherlock's relative understood that inside the cylinder right now, there is bone number 1 or 2, and the remaining one is on the border of 3 or 2. Next, the guy pulls out a huge wad of money that he earned from a bunch of bets, and bets all his money on odd. After this bastard heard what bet the guy had placed, he immediately tried to change the value of the number using his cunning trick. He made one deft move, thereby changing the value. The dice became numbers 2, 3, and 1, which gave a total of 6, which was the opposite of our protagonist's bet. Everyone around immediately thought that the guy had just lost 1,000 in an instant, but after a while someone screamed saying that it was haihumi, which means an odd roll. Even the leader of this game was discouraged because he completely forgot that when this set of values comes up, according to the rules, it is considered odd. However, unlike everyone around who had already begun to panic, our main character with 200 AQ continued to remain calm and silently smile. He did not want to interrupt the mooning. At this moment, the representative of the gambling house made a terrible mistake. He believed that everyone around him was newbies and idiots, and they would not know about this combination. But he was deeply mistaken and paid the price. He realized that from the very beginning he had no chance of winning. The guy continued to not understand how the bastard was beating him like that for the umpteenth time. Even using tricks, he lost the bet. He was at a loss. This entire gaming process took only 5 minutes. The representative of the gambling house, out of despair, placed his hands on the ground and was confused. He began to panic because this guy simply could not win, no matter what he was guided by. In this place, he won 5,000 won from the workers and lost the capital as much as 10,000. This even included borrowed money from the remaining money. Now he will have to return with debts. After a few moments, the gambling house master, looking at the floor, admits defeat and says even if the guy makes another bet, he no longer has money to give. Our main character in turn was disappointed. He mocked him by saying that they were also called a gambling house, but he was just about to get carried away, and they were so disappointing. The representative of the gambling house was forced to apologize to the client. He promised that next time he would definitely take more cash with him so as not to upset the guy. But that's all for today. After this, Sigma gets up and looking at the guy who is kneeling with his head down, he says, "Well, since this is the case, nothing can be done, so the gambling house must leave the construction site." The guy even showed a hint of politeness and concern by telling the man who acted as a representative of the gambling house to take care of himself upon his return. After that, the thin man, along with his 2 big boys, got into their red Ferrari of these times and left with sad results. Looking after the leaving gambling house, the guy told the unskilled workers that these scoundrels would not come here again. He would not even risk relieving himself in this area. A few moments after the car moved away, all the workers raised their fists and began to rejoice for the chosen victory. They were all happy that these Japanese left here with their tail between their legs. The guy raised his hand and told the laborers to moderate their voices, because if they continue to be so happy, the police will instantly gather, misunderstanding what kind of movement this is. However, the laborers continued to shout, saying that don't shout as much as you like, in this outback no one will know. They shouted because such a day had happened in their lives. This was a chance to rejoice. After the guy picked up the money box containing all the money he won, he told the leader to line up. He asked him what he was going to do with it. The generous Gigachad asked the leader if he really thought that he was going to misappropriate everything. Considering people as empty space, he was going to return the lost money to people. The leader was in shock. Next, we move to the workplace of our protagonist, but this time he was not distributing personal signs to each worker, but the money that they lost during bets. One of the workers said that he was of course grateful, but he asked when he was supposed to return them. Our main character smiled, saying that he was just giving them away. The guy also added that if they do not spend the money returned to them in another gambling house, this news will be simply wonderful for him. The handyman even burst into tears. He thanked the guy for his kind heart, saying that he would never forget the benefactor of the student's son Wu. That day, our main character returned the signs and, without making a single mistake, he returned to people the money they had lost at rates almost twice the original amount. After some time, we watch as the sun begins to set, and by that time our main character has already returned everyone's money. The manager asks if he will regret that he scattered the money so recklessly. He explained his question by saying that you never know for sure whether you will come across such big money again or not. The guy wasn't going to answer in any detail because he didn't regret what he had done one bit. Instead, he asked the manager to just think about good luck. Next, our main character said goodbye to the manager, who still did not believe that his money had returned to him. Sigma told the manager that they would see each other again tomorrow. Stopping at a beautiful pond, the guy regretted that he would have to say goodbye to these guys again, but he had only just managed to get used to others. Now he needs to leave because he has caused such a stir that now he will not be able to live quietly nearby, because rumors about this day will spread very quickly throughout the entire district. Continuing to walk against the backdrop of the sunset, the guy was sure that not even a couple of days would pass before rumors would fly from all sides and attack in a crowd. Only annoying, and if you think about it, going to prison again is no different from all this. After a few tens of minutes, our main character finally reached the house in which he lived. Very soon, evening should have come. Immediately after the guy came home, he began to pack all his things into a suitcase so as not to waste time and leave so as not to run into problems. However, our main character, apparently, did not have time to escape from this place because behind him, the door opened and the same two huge big guys who were with that old man stood in it. A few moments later, one of them approached our main character and adjusted his jaw with a powerful hook to the jaw. This thug's weight was so superior to our protagonist that with just one blow he sent him squatting on his butt on the floor. The guy tried to save himself by immediately getting up after receiving a powerful hook and starting shouting that there was fire on the second floor so that help could come to him. However, these two stupid gorillas told the guy to shut up because no one would come to help him no matter how loudly he shouted, because this place is no different from the front yard of their Yamada Gumi. Rubbing his chin, this brave guy told the thick-headed gorillas that they were deeply mistaken and that no one would hear him. However, this time the sharp tongue did not help our main character. The next moment, the guy receives a powerful blow to the solar plexus, which again sends him flying. Then the series of blows continues with the second thug. After the first blow to the chest, he receives a second blow to the jaw with a huge swing. When the guy finds himself on the ground, these two big guys begin to imagine that this guy's head becomes a soccer ball, and they become Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. Next, this thug takes our main character by the hair and says that in his opinion, he has already told him to shut his mouth. Then another actor appears on stage. The appearance of this man greatly surprised our main character. The man who appeared in front of our main character is not Ryan Gosling, but he will also do. He told his guys that this is the man they were looking for. Then the thug asks our main character where the money is in his house, and if he doesn't tell him, his head will once again turn out to be a soccer ball. Next, the guy points his finger to the side to his left, and there really is a black closed bag. The gorilla turns his head and sees it too. Having opened the bag, the gorilla realizes that there is not enough of a good share here. He immediately asks our main character where he put the rest of the share. A moment later, the guy's shirt ends up in the huge hands of a bully who asks where the money is. The guy replies that he is very wasteful and spent several thousand. The thug demands to speak more clearly and answer honestly. The second thug tells the first one to stop beating him because at this rate he will kill him. He also adds that they had to hide the money. But what's the point if they lose it again anyway? After the big guy lets our main character go, he asks, "Since when to spend your own money as you please is also a sin, where is this world heading?" The big guy simply cannot tolerate this insolence and makes a second blow to the stomach of our main character. There is clearly a party going on inside the guy's stomach. The representative's security guard demands that the guy close his mouth and follow him. He asks if he really thought that they would turn a blind eye if he coveted Yamada Gumi's money. A few moments later, the level of threats escalated to a whole new level because the guy took out a knife and put it to the guy's throat. The thug threatened that if he twitches again, he will make an additional cut in his throat, and no one will care about the death of the Korean boy. The guy of the second thug asked him to stop mocking him. The next frame, we again watch the same luxury car, or a Ferrari of that time. They are again going somewhere. Inside the car, there is a representative of the gambling house, the driver of the gambling house, and two big men who surround our main character. Further, the Giga Chad does not shut up even in this position. He says that the car is wide and there is another place nearby. He tells the stupid gorillas to stop pushing. In response to this, the guy with a chubby face turns and asks the guy a highly intellectual question. How many more blows does our main character want to receive? The guy responds to this by saying that he can beat him as much as he wants, but he is not one of those who remains in debt. He also added that he remembers very well that he dealt him 3 blows. After the thug heard this remark, he got tired and hit the guy in the face with his elbow for the 4th time. In response to this, the guy bared his teeth and, with anger in his thoughts, counted the 4th blow that had just been dealt. The course of events is interrupted, and we again observe the already familiar wheel that stops, which means that they have arrived at their destination. After this, 2 big guys start pushing our main character so that he doesn't get in and out of the car, and then follows them. After some time, these 3 lead our main character, apparently to some big shot in a gambling house who is currently taking a hot bath. A moment later, goon number 1 throws the guy with black hair to the floor, while goon number 2 tells his master that they have caught the culprit. A moment later, we watch as apparently the boss of the gambling house gets up from his sauna, and we get a beautiful view of his toned body and cool tattoo like a yakuza. After this, the guy turns around and, examining our main character from head to toe, says that he is much younger than he expected. The head of the gambling house lights a cigarette and sits down at the chair in front of our main character and listens to what those same 2 big guys are saying to him. After the boss of the gambling house has heard enough, he orders the man to stop. He tells the guy that they will now talk calmly. Looking at the guy through the eyes of a hunter, he asks our main character the first question. Since when have they known Kobata? The guy replies that this is the first time he has heard this strange name, and he has no idea who the conversation is about. He feels quite cold-blooded even here, but due to the fact that for some reason those around him did not like the answer, he receives a kick that should bring him to his senses. The huge monkey demands to behave better. Hitting the guy with his huge foot while he is lying on the ground, the thug kindly explains the question by saying that he is being asked what his relationship is with that gambler. Next, the boss of the gambling house orders the brainless man to stop beating the interrogated man. He immediately turns off his testosterone and listens and obeys him. Unlike his 2 thugs, the boss of this place had a brain. He said that even if these 2 agreed on something, those standing nearby still carefully watched what was happening, which means that there was no trick. Meanwhile, that same representative of the gambling house falls to his knees and says that all this is unfair because he never betrayed his boss. Although this Kabato is not particularly experienced, he is not trash who decides for 2. However, even the representative of the gambling house gets it from one of the stupid monkeys. Having made a blow, the thug tells the idiot to shut up before he finishes him off. Further, apparently our main character wanted to clarify the situation to the most important person here. But he began his address by saying, "Mr." This caused the gorilla's neural activity to immediately turn on. He told the guy to watch his language and just call him Mr., because the man in front of him is Mr. Yamada. Next, Mr. Yamada tells the gorilla not to interfere, because if everything continues like this, they will never finish. He asked to just let him talk to our main character. Our main character, calling Mr. Yamada Mr., asked him to trust the lackey, because in today's game of Chincharoran, there was no trick, no collusion, no deception. He is just a slightly more experienced player. The one who is a little more experienced than his opponent always wins in gambling because this works almost everywhere. Everyone was shocked that, despite his position, the guy continued to persist in speaking as he saw fit. They all silently watched because they were forbidden to interfere. Then Mr. Yamato laughed, saying that in front of him was a real daredevil, because he gave him a chance and he would lie right in front of him until the last moment, because it is impossible to win 18,000 with only 21 in hand. The guy responded to this by saying who knows, because if these guys had brought more money, then perhaps it wouldn't have ended with 18,000 and he would have earned more. Yamada clearly liked this attitude of our protagonist. He asked one of his assistants to bring everything necessary for the guy to try his tricks here. After the workers of this gambling house brought everything they needed, Yamato sat down opposite the table and asked him, since he was so skillful, if he could win here. The guy, getting up from his knee, understood that due to the fact that they were in the bathhouse, the sound from the bones would be echoed a little more difficult for him. But even despite this, the conditions were not as bad as the previous ones. After our main character looked around and analyzed the situation, he realized that everything was not so bad. He agreed to demonstrate his skills to these guys. Mr. Yamato was not going to pull the cat by the tail. He immediately took the cylinder in his hands and decided to start testing the abilities of our protagonist. The guy immediately listened to the sound and understood. Even though he looked different compared to the gamblers I had the chance to play with today, he was completely immature in terms of games, and this meant that the dice were not rigged. After Mr. Yamato placed the cylinder on the table, he eagerly waited for our protagonist to try to give the correct answer and confirm his words. The guy answered the master that he doesn't play games on which he didn't bet anything. He's not a little boy to play a game just like that. Mr. Yamato realized that he was a rude person. He highly appreciated the spirit that is not inherent in a Korean. Yamato said that the game is not empty. The lives of our main character and Kabata are at stake. The guy once again answered timidly. He said that usually he doesn't risk lives, but if he says so, then so be it. The guy chose the odd one. A moment later, Mr. Yamato raised the cylinder, and in front of him were dice numbers 2, 5, 6, which gave a total of 13, which meant the guy won. Everyone around was shocked that the guy really hit it without a doubt, and guessed the even or odd number under the cylinder. Then the guy said that he won, so he can leave. Heading to the door, he still asked if everything would be fine if he just left. The gorilla once again intervened. Putting his big hand on the guy's shoulder, he asked him who allowed him to leave. Mr. Yamato began to be interested in this guy. He could not understand whether he was a terribly lucky guy or something else. He asked him to guess what would come up again. The guy smiled and asked the owner of the gambling house what they would bet this time, because as he said earlier, he doesn't play for nothing, because he is a Giga Chad. Mr. Yamato bet the entire amount of damage that he caused to him. That is, if our main character wins, he will be able to forget about those 10,000 won. But if suddenly our main character loses, then on the contrary, he will owe 10,000 won to Mr. Yamato. Meanwhile, he made a throw and was waiting for an answer. After being silent for a while, the guy broke the silence and said that there was an odd number under the cylinder again. Without even waiting for the cylinder to rise, he demanded 10,000 won. Having lifted the cylinder, Mr. Yamato saw that the sum of the numbers of the dice was indeed odd. This made him think very much about whether the guy was telling the truth. Our main character was plunged into excitement. He offered to bet the money that was in his bag. He offered to play another game for Mr. Yamato. However, instead of answering, Mr. Yamato asked the puppy what his secret was and how he guessed everything without a drop of doubt. The guy replied that he didn't have a special secret. He was just born with critical thinking and very good intuition, which always helps him. However, such an unclear answer did not suit the serious Mr. Yamato at all. He ordered his tame gorilla to deliver another blow to the guy so that it would be easier for him to tell the truth. At the moment of receiving the blow, the guy realized that if everything continued like this, his life would really end in this place, which meant that he urgently needed to come up with something. Mr. Yamato became even more serious. He asked our main character how he manages to guess everything. If he reveals his secret, he will be released. However, our main character continued to say that this is innate intuition. Although he guesses everything, he does not have any techniques or secrets that could be passed on to someone. After the guy saw that the gorilla was coming to hit him in the stomach again, he asked him to stop, saying that he could teach them one method. Suddenly, the guy asked them how they got there, what made them take place in the middle of chaos, violence, and stabbing. He asked if they could explain it. The reason why their fists are so much stronger and more frightening than anyone else who fell to this bottom at the same time as them. The guy said that they couldn't give an explanation for this, just as he couldn't give an explanation for why he guessed everything. Having placed the dice on the board, he said that he could only say that he was much luckier than the others. The gorilla, having listened to all this nonsense, was about to use the guy again as a punching bag, but Mr. Yamato stopped him and allowed our main character to continue his speech. Mr. Yamato said that in this case they need to make sure that they are telling the truth, after which he ordered his henchmen to bring Hato. He demanded from our main character that he demonstrate his abilities, and if his words are true, then so be it. He will simply let everything take its course. But in case our main character is lying, Mr. Yamato took out and unsheathed his sharp katana and told the guy that he could forget about his safe return home. After some time following the order, this guy's subordinates brought everything necessary for the game, and Mr. Yamato arranged everything as needed on the table. Next, he asked our main character if he knew the rules of how to play this game. The guy, in his own style, answered that he knew the rules just as well as anyone else. Cards in his hands. Mr. Yamade said that the cards depict all the phenomena from January to December. He also added that Koreans especially like this type of game. Next, Mr. Yamade pointed with an open hand at our main character and said that if he draws the best cards, then victory will be in his pocket. The guy once again told Mr. Yamada that he was not a small child to win without making some kind of bet on some kind of bet. At this time, the man realized that judging by the way he thought about betting under such and such circumstances, he was clearly not an ordinary fellow. Next, Mr. Yamato plunged his sword into the table and declared that the bet for this game would be his life again. If he wins, he would save his life again. He continued that he should have been finished off in a good way because he ruined their table in a place where reputation is important. But if he wins, he will turn a blind eye to the money he spent and his impudent behavior. However, if our main character loses, then Mr. Yamato will deprive him of his tongue and palm for his insolence so that he never forgets who he crossed the road with. Mr. Yamato asked the guy if he had any questions. The guy asked if he had to pull out the best card from the entire deck. He continued by saying that Mr. Yamato should have known that the meanings of cards in Korea and Japan are different. He further asked him if Mr. Yamato asked him to choose the best card. He asked if this card was the case of the January card. The next moment, Mr. Yamato grabbed his sword, telling our main character that he had gone too far, but this time he lost in this game. But Sigma's composure was inexhaustible. He asked the gentleman to wait because he had not yet completed his turn so that he could make a decision. After the guy revealed the January card, he continued revealing the February card, and he was not going to stop at all. Next, he revealed the March card, and after it continued to observe the order of the months, revealing the April card, he again blindly built the ideal order. While the guy continued to skillfully use his intuition, the Giga Chad lackey who was conducting today's game at the construction site said that May with the iris depicted on the map, June with the peony, and July with the red Lespedeza. The guy continued to follow the footman's instructions with incredible accuracy and confidence, continuing to reveal the cards of the months in the correct order. Mr. Yamato watched the process in surprise. Having reached the November card, our main character picks it up and says that when he reaches this card, everything becomes different. Because the leaf of the atom tree that the phoenix is holding can symbolize the supreme part of the Tokugawa shogunate in Japan. In South Korea, it is different. The supreme power is symbolized by this card, with a man depicted on it with an umbrella. A few moments later, Mr. Yamato's table ran out of unturned cards, and all the cards in front of him were revealed in the correct order. At this moment, the gentleman was completely at a loss because this guy, right now standing in front of him, guessed all the months on the cards of the hut one by one and did not doubt it for a single second when opening the cards. Next, the guy told Mr. Yamato that he knows the value of his life, from which he can easily earn a fortune, which is why he believes that he has proven his talent. After Mr. Yamato realized that this idiot was not one of those who would wander around the gates, he realized that a special approach needed to be found towards him. Next, the most important person in this room shouted the name of the gorilla Bava and ordered him to quickly escort this mister out. Bava had no choice but to obey his master. Next, our main character, who entered this room as a nobody, came out as the one everyone calls Mister. While the guy was heading towards the exit, someone stopped him calling him Mister. Turning around and looking at who called him, our main character was very shocked by the fact that he was called Master. You won't believe it, but the one who called him Master was the same main guy who invited the guy to sit back and then apologized to him. The guy said that such sudden changes are scary. After our main character brought a cigarette to his mouth, a gorilla named Bava immediately approached him and set his lighter on fire with his lighter. Meanwhile, former Mr. Yamato asked our main character whether he would like beer or sake. The guy replied that it would be best to drink cold beer. While our main character was drinking a cold beer, the man opposite said that seeing how such a capable person races, it is immediately clear that although Joseon is small, it has remarkable talents. His beer to the end, our main character told the man opposite that his introduction was too long. Instead, he asked him to quickly say what he wanted to tell him. The man continued by saying that he was curious why he behaved so openly. Despite the fact that the game was initially one-on-one with the casino, he asked if he was afraid that he would be in danger due to turning 21 into 18,000. Having poured and sent our main character another glass of beer, the man also continued that because of his fraud, the police would have had a lot of questions for him if they had been nearby. After the glass of light cold beer rolled to our protagonist, he immediately took it in his hands and drank it in one gulp. After he finished his beer, he explained to the man that he did this because he was angry. Because when he found out that the money of the comrades with whom he worked together fell into the hands of a Japanese fraudster, he could not remain idle. The man asked the guy if his incentive was that he just wanted to wipe the nose of the arrogant Japanese with his machinations. The guy responded to this by briefly answering that this is how these sensations were felt, because the arrogant Japanese really infuriate him. The man told our main character that he had definitely proven to them that there was a flying creature above the jumping creature. Then he thanked him for this on his own behalf. Next, the man in the blue robe stood up and asked our protagonist how about not staying here but instead continuing elsewhere. Even though the man placed his large hand on the guy's shoulder in a friendly manner, he looked away and said that he was very grateful, but not today. The man in the robe told the guy that he didn't have to be modest because he was treating him so that he could relax and have fun after a hard day. Next, this man gets up from his seat and heads out, while our main character continues to sit in place trying to understand what just happened. Back with peripheral vision, the guy understands that something has clearly gone wrong, but he cannot understand what is wrong now. Then the course of events stops and we are transported to some strange place in the style of ancient Japan. It's already night outside. We hear a voice greeting Yamada-san. A girl of amazing beauty dressed like a beauty from ancient Japan sits on her lap, and upon seeing Yamada-san, says that she was waiting for him. Arriving with our main character, Yamada-san says that today is just a wonderful day, and the only thing he wants now is to drink all night, so he needs the best Japanese girls. Having heard the request from her master, the girl bows and asks Yamada-san to wait, and she to take care of him with all her heart and with all her might. Suddenly, opening her eyes, a girl in traditional Japanese attire sees the dirty feet of our main character. Foot fetishists enjoy. The girl immediately approaches the feet of our main character, and taking a warm cloth in her hands, begins to wipe the feet of our main character. After some time, these two find themselves at a set table, on which there is a bunch of Japanese cuisine. Yamato-san tells the guy that he can take as much as he wants. He calls him a young teacher and invites him to raise a toast. Yamato-san asks our protagonist if he would like to congratulate their future prosperous business with a toast. Sigma, who does not understand anything, begins to simply drink whatever he can get his hands on. He says that he has no idea what the men opposite him are talking about. The guy asks if he really doesn't know. Then he says that by combining their strengths, they will become a team that will capture all the gambling houses without much difficulty. At that moment, it was as if lightning struck our main character's head. The puzzle inside his head finally came together, and he realized that they were going to use him as a tool. While Yamato-san is laughing loudly, our main character is trying to understand what to do, because he is in real trouble and now doesn't know what to do in order to get out of here. The guy only now realizes that he fell into a trap without realizing it, and it will be very difficult to get out. Next, our main character, addressing the man as his teacher, says that he is clearly mistaken because he did not intend to gamble all his life. He explained his position by saying that after he served time in prison for gambling and for buying a Genshin account, he swore that he would never return to prison. Yamato-san begins to laugh and says that under his protection, no policeman will ever come near him. This is what he can guarantee him 100%. Next, the guy replies that he will not do anything to the poor, just to fill his stomach and get benefits from the poor people. In addition, the state law is harsh even for aristocrats whose gambling can deprive them of their position. But if he cannot even imagine how Yamato will be able to guarantee all this. Yamato-san explains to the guy that he still doesn't know how the world of gambling works. The application of harsh measures or punishment is about the so-called cultural city of Gyeongsang, but Incheon is very different from it. After all, here in any case, the city was conceived as a settlement for foreigners. Since the central authorities are filled with Japanese, the law is not written to them. From the outside, it all looks like arbitrariness, but it is worthy of admiration. This arbitrariness especially concerns gambling. Yamato-san asked the guy if he had been to the Midu market. The guy replied that he had only heard that the Incheon Midu market was comparable in terms of the scale of transactions to Tokyo and Osaka. Yamato-san summed up the conclusions of Sherlock Holmes by saying that, simply put, the mid-market is a cycle of greed and money. After all, dear guests, the Japanese, called ood, lose and earn several $100,000 every time the prices for beans and rice change. And if you compare these races, then gambling brings and takes away profits, regardless of how childish the game is. This guy's story, the main character understands that it looks like there are quite a lot of rich Japanese in Incheon who are capable of incurring losses of several $100,000. After this story, Yamato asked our protagonist if he could interest him in this topic at least a little. Raising another cup, the guy said that he had succeeded quite a bit, but anyone would be interested if you were walking around in such a small town with such a lot of money. While drinking a glass of tea, the guy realizes that if he makes 500,000 won per night, then he is ready to take the risk once, because with such quick money he can make his dream come true. After the man in the kimono heard that the guy was at least a little interested in this topic, he said that he did not doubt him, and now he will tell a more exciting story. He further continued by saying that his story will be about the most influential force that is so powerful that it controls the entire Incheon. The guy asked his mentor teacher if we would now talk about the military. Yamato replied that it was really the military. Because after the victory in the war, Incheon was an important stronghold, which attracted the interest of the military to him. The man in the robe continued the story by saying that no force can stop what the high-ranking Japanese military wants, which means that gambling is what the military wants. The military wants to stimulate the thrill of competition. For those who have experienced both the delight of victory in war and the fear of death, these people have become addicted to these sensations. After this, for the military, ordinary life seems dull. If it were not for Genshin Impact and women, alcohol, and gambling, then every day would be unbearable for them. However, among all this, only gambling develops the competitive spirit because the rest you can get as much as you want. For this, you only need to pay and receive. Listening to the guy's story about the need for people to gamble, the guy himself, without explanation, understands how exciting gambling is, so he understands it perfectly. The man continues to make a revelation. He says that near the port of Incheon there is a place called the Jemulpo Club. Once there was a meeting place for Westerners, and now it acts as an association of Japanese veterans. Every night weeding games are held in this place. These scales amaze the imagination of high-ranking rich people and distinguished foreign guests. This place is a paradise for experiencing a sense of excitement. Further, our main character says that he does not understand the reason why they, knowing about such a place where money flows like a river, decided to collect pennies from the handymen. He asked if all those Japanese military men and generous guests of the Midu market were not enough for them. Yamato-san explained that the bigger the jackpot, the greater the danger. Entering the Jemulpo Club can be very unsafe. Without a good sword, only a real fool rushes into battle. Now everything falls into place. The guy understands that this man in a kimono needs him as a sword, as his weapon with which he will get into this club of the rich. Yamato-san says that if he suddenly decides to refuse, he will disgrace him, which means that he will get angry. This will not be charity, because he will give 20% of the amount he earns. Our main character understands that first he will need to work in this way, because a poor man like him will definitely not be allowed onto the threshold of such worthy establishments. Having made dozens of conclusions in his head, the guy takes a drink and says that in order to start cooperation, he needs to reconsider all the conditions. Having heard the need put forward by our main character, the man opposite asks what is wrong with the conditions. Our main character replies that they clearly do not satisfy both parties to the contract. At first, Yamato-san asked how dare he bargain with him, but then he decided that it was quite funny, so he listened to what the guy had to say. The first condition of our main character was that he would not, under any circumstances, fleece the poor Joseon people, under any pretext. However, the man in the kimono was not at all embarrassed by this. He says that this is not a problem at all, because as long as the Jemulpo Club brings money, there is no reason to do such things. The second condition is that our main character is in no way anyone's subordinate, and therefore he can easily go anywhere, and it's also worth reconsidering their shares, because 8-2 is an unacceptable ratio. However, these 2 points, judging by the man's eyes, made him very angry, even more than the delayed series of Skibidi toilets. But what gets the most for this is an ordinary mug of tea, which, due to 2 conditions of our protagonist, goes into the wall and breaks into pieces. However, even despite this, our main character continues to maintain the canonical calm of a poker player. Next, this man grabbed our main character by the shirt and was ready to tear him apart, because he had run out of patience to tolerate the wayward character of our main character, who always goes against everyone. Then he started yelling at the talent, telling him to repeat his terms again. He yelled because he wanted to come to a good agreement, but with inadequate conditions. Next, our main character asks Yamato if he recently said that without a good sword, he would never get into the Jemulpo Club, which is why he puts forward the conditions befitting a good sword. He tells the man to choose either to break the sword with his own hands and spend his whole life taking measly pennies from the laborers, or to make concessions to me and dominate this place, because he cannot live as a puppet. This man is furious. He hits the table and tells the bastard that he knows how to babble in an arrogant tone. He increases his share to 30%. He asks if he is satisfied. However, our main character is a negotiation genius and simply Sigma. Looking into his eyes says that he demands 40% of his profit and he is not going to back down with his condition. This psycho starts yelling again, pointing his finger at himself and saying that he cannot ask for such things because all the capital belongs to him and taking 40% is dishonest. However, the guy reports with complete confidence that his skill is capable of easily multiplying any amount hundreds of times without restrictions on repetition. The guy calms down and says that he clearly knows how to seduce people. He again calls him his young teacher. Then he agrees to give him 40% of the profits. But in return, he warns him if something doesn't work out for him and his deposit suffers, he won't be happy and he'll just have huge problems. At this time, the thug is AFK. But the man also adds that he will return his arrogance to him 1,000 times more, and with interest. Then the guy tells Bava that he is with his Mr. Colleague, but he still holds him by the collar. Next, our main character does a very strange action. He hits this big guy in the face with an uppercut, but this guy barely feels the pain from this blow. This guy's jaw is so strong that the guy's hand received more damage. After the blow, the guy told the big man that he had not yet settled with him, and he had 6 more blows left to return. Next, our main character asks the owner of this chain gorilla if he can hit him. The gorilla's owner answers him that he can give him 6 blows, and after that, the banquet can begin. And they will start the banquet, because it's simply impossible to talk for so long about work when there are so many such beautiful girls around. Our main character is not yet going to return the 6 blows. Instead, he sits down at the banquet telling the thug that he will then properly return these 6 blows to him. But for now, he offers him a drink. Having seen this funny dialogue, the man understands that such a talent for communicating with people is not found in every place, because he made a very funny joke about Bava, and finally he said that he would wait for news. Next, Yamato-san asks our main character how he likes his young teacher. The guy doesn't understand what the man is talking about, and asks what he means. After a moment, Yamato-san explains himself more specifically, asking our protagonist if he likes Tsubaki, who is sitting and waiting next to him. Meanwhile, the girl in question blushes and covers her face with her sleeve. She tells Mr. Yamada that he confuses her very much with such words. Next, this girl places her hand gently on the hand of our main character. The guy has talent, so he easily notices this and looks at the painted girl. Having looked at the girl in more detail, Sigma asks if there are any men who will voluntarily reject such a beautiful girl like her. Next, this girl throws herself into a hug with our main character. Even though they don't know each other, she says that our main character is very kind to her, and she is immensely grateful for the fact that he saved her face. Watching what is happening, the man in the kimono says that this is all nice because the proud Tsubaki does not show her affection for men every day. Then Mr. Yamato and the woman who is sitting with him leave. The man says that on this whining he will leave them alone. But our main character was afraid of this because he is a Sigma, and if he leaves so suddenly he might lose his Sigma status. Before leaving, Yamada-san tells the guy not to worry about anything and drink plenty because all the bills should have already returned to Yamada. However, this is not what worries our main character. The man asks him if the young mentor is really afraid of the approach of night alone with a girl. However, the guy with black hair throws up his hands and says that this is not the case at all. He doesn't have a penny in his pocket, he can't even take a taxi and get to the boarding house, and besides, they dragged him here barefoot so he can't even walk, can't get there. Next, Mr. Yamato asks why the hell would this guy return to the brothel, because here he has a house, alcohol, food, and most importantly a woman. And not just any woman, but a beautiful, sweeter-than-a-flower Tsubika, who is looking forward to solitude with our main character. Next, Yamato-san leaves with his big man and the woman. Before leaving, he tells him that this is all his mercy, so he shouldn't be burdened. Instead, let him just enjoy as they want. Late night comes. We are transported to the room where our main character was sent to spend the night together with a cool waifu, who at that moment notifies the guy that she has already laid out a blanket in the next room. Next, the guy gets out of bed and goes to the window, after which he opens it with a sharp movement of his hand in order to look at what is happening around. Looking down, the guy sees that there are a lot of guys below who are clearly not volunteers. They are all dressed in black and look intimidating. Next, the guy turns away from the window and looking around the room tries to figure out what he should do now and what he should do right now in such a situation. Next, Tsubaka, who has been in the same room with our main character all this time, breaks the silence and asks the gentleman if he feels awkward now. The girl canonically says that if he doesn't like her, or the way she cares about him, then she can leave and call another lady to the room that he likes better. However, the guy against the backdrop of a beautiful moon color tells the girl that she shouldn't worry about it because her fears are in vain, and this is not true. Against the background of the moonlight, this guy looks like a real Korean idol. It's not for nothing that he comes from Korea. Filled with romantic energy, he tells her that there is no need to call another lady. Further, apparently these two are engaged in physical exercises together. And if this is indeed the case, I will no longer call our main character Sigma. The next day comes, we are transported to a room that is already familiar to us. In front of us again is Yamato-san, who asks our main character how his night went. The guy asks the strange man what he wants to hear from him. The man says that apparently he liked Tsubaki, because he doesn't even grumble. Then he tells the guy that they should go, they will have a snack and then do something. But the guy, instead of obeying, asked Mr. Yamato to at least send one of his big boys to go to the boarding house where he lives and bring his shoes, because he has no desire to walk barefoot. Yamato-san tells our main character not to be a sissy and just put on some cheap shoes of some hard worker and follow him, because in any case they also need to pick up new shoes. The course of events stops and we again observe the Ferrari of these times, which is already very well known to us. This time the car arrived at the Breeze shopping arcade of Incheon Station in the studio. Next, we watch as Mr. Yamato, with a serious look, tells the workshop worker to bring him light clothes only from the best quality materials. He also added that he will take about a dozen at a time. The worker with a thick mustache was surprised at such a rich request and immediately said that he understood everything and would begin to fulfill the order. He asked them to wait a minute. After the studio worker provided a huge number of different costume options, Yamato-san immediately chose many options that he liked. After Yamato has made the necessary purchases, he sits down on a chair. The guy asks him what he is going to do with all these clothes because our main character doesn't really need a suit. But since they buy him a couple, then a couple is enough. Yamato-san answers the guy that if he said it, then it's necessary. He ordered our hero to stand up straight and allow himself to be measured carefully. He asked not to force people to do the work twice, because they already have their hands full. While the mustachioed worker was taking measurements, he could not help but say that the gentleman was very tall and well-built, so in his opinion, the clothes would turn out very well. Next, Mr. Yamato handed a wad of money to the employee and said that he also needed to hurry up with the rest of the clothes. But this guy's gray suit should be ready, preferably tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Giving away a large pile of money, the guy repeated that they need to hurry because the deadline for the workers is the day after tomorrow. The worker turns out to be a pleasant person. He worships the man and says that even if he sleeps, he will finish the work on time. He tells these two to come to Gabon soon. Then the Ferrari of that time drives quickly to the side because, according to Yamato, they still have a lot of things to do, so they need to hurry up. Next, the course of events moves inside the car. We watch as the Korean idol asks the mafioso what he is up to, and he asked who he thinks he is and why he needs so many clothes. Next, the guy asked if Mr. Yamato expected to dress him up in order to sell him to a rich widow. The man laughed, saying that it would be nice because his face is so beautiful that even women of aristocratic blood would be jealous. Next, Mr. Yamade convinced the guy that everything was fine, and even if he caused him losses, he would still reimburse all these expenses and his money in full. After that, the two were busy shopping. Only after they picked up 4 new pairs of shoes, they stopped for a while, and then went back to buy a new item of clothing. Then the two went to another store where they bought our main character a shiny calfskin belt. Next, our main character was bought a briefcase that was already familiar to us. After this last acquisition, Mr. Yamada's shopping finally came to an end, and everything he needed was ready. Next, we move back to the headquarters of Mr. Yamada, who, sitting at the table with our main character, finally exhale because spending money also requires a lot of effort. At this time, the guy was already sitting in his cool new kimono. Our main character has become a real handsome man. He tells Mr. Yamada that he is absolutely right, and it was terribly tiring and he still cannot understand what happened. Further, Mr. Yamada said that the clothes hanger from our main character turned out to be quite good, which means that the money was not wasted. He asked his tame gorilla if he was right. Meanwhile, Mr. Yamada's pet gorilla was not very talkative. She took a short look at our main character and said that the guy is definitely a good clothes hanger. Next, our main character, turning on incredible deduction, told Mr. Yamada, now that he was playing along, let him tell the reason for his actions. The gentleman was surprised how quickly he understood everything. The reason for all today's actions was that according to Mr. Yamada, he will be among the aristocrats, which means he must be a wealthy aristocrat, which means he must wear such things. At this moment, it pops up in our main character's head how he, being an orphan, understands that if they did not know how to gamble, they would have long ago become orphans and would have died of hunger. A few moments later, Mr. Yamato pulled out some documents from his kimono and threw them in front of our main character and said that he must read this. The man in the red kimono explained that from now on, his position in society is written in the smallest detail in these papers. He must follow this so that no problems arise. He begins to read that from this moment he takes the position of a man named Sayonji Yuya, who was born 41 years after the establishment of the Meiji era, and was born in 1908 to Kyoto, dropped out of Tokyo University in his first year of study. Worry about the passport photo, since there were special people who would forge documents for the guy. Mr. Yamato asks the guy if he likes the name Sayonji Yuya. The guy, in response to this, instead of a direct answer, asks who this person is. The The guy replies that everything is written in the document. The gentleman says that the guy seemed to tell him that he went to high school, which means he can read the text himself. At this moment, our main character understands that from now on, he will have a false status. He does not know why he has to go so far just to earn money and save his skin. The pumped-up man replies that this is all because he is Korean. He asks him if he really thought that such a high-class social group as Jamulpo would accept a Korean boy who doesn't even have a pedigree. Our main character grinned, saying that since this is high society, he is looking for a suitable person to get closer to the wealthy aristocrats. Yamato-san replied that when he was gambling in Gyeongseon with bets like 5 or 10,000, being a high school student was enough. But now we are talking about a completely different level, where everything is completely different. Yamato-san continued by saying that due to large daily contributions, players are beginning to take a closer look at the personality of their opponent, because if you are afraid that he will begin to muddy the waters. Having heard all this, our main character wondered what he should answer to these words of Yakuza Yamada, so he had no choice but to accept everything. Hearing this, Yamada at first took it with hostility and was ready to tear everyone apart. But then he laughed throughout the dojo and said that it was not without reason that people in the club took him for a businessman. He suggested that he was apparently a success. Returning to the conversation, Yamato-san said that from now on, our main character will be called Sayonji Yuya. No matter what existing member he is, no one will deal with him unless you have a noble status. Sayonji Yuya asks if this means that a person named Yuya could pass this test, but he looks like an ordinary runt. Next, Yamato-san took out his wallet and said that his name has no value because the person whose name he took was an ordinary Japanese student who was a couple of years older, and this is not enough to end up in society with big shots. However, his new name has the surname Sayonji, and this surname means that he is the master of the Sikaj clan, and therefore, until recently, little men like them were not allowed to talk to him. Continuing to study this man's documents, our main character asked how this man's birth certificate got to the port of the colony. The guy began to think that the Sikage family was one of the most noble families among the Japanese aristocracy. Now one could guess what all these luxurious clothes were prepared for. Yamato-san adds that even if an aristocrat gets mired in debt, he needs to be prepared for the fact that he will suffer from moneylenders, because having sold all the land, jewelry, the last thing you can sell is nothing more than personality. That's exactly how they ended up with the personality and documents of this person in their hands, which they will use right now. Next, our main character asked if he correctly guessed that they wanted to get closer to the club by introducing himself as this aristocrat. Yamato-san replied that all the guesses were correct. Fortunately, our main character speaks Japanese well enough that he could not be distinguished from the Japanese. Even if his knowledge of the Japanese language was let down, Yamato-san was confident that he would not be stabbed with a bamboo pike because he accidentally mispronounced the number 15 or 50. Our main character further said that as a Korean, it would be difficult for him to laugh at this joke because many Koreans were brutally killed because it was difficult for them to pronounce the numbers 15 and 50 in Japanese. Next, Yamato-san assures our protagonist that all this is not a joke, because he is going to join a club that is teeming with members of the naval forces and scions of the Japanese aristocracy. Their authority is simply off the charts. The guy also encouraged our main character by saying that if he makes even one wrong step, he will immediately be rewarded by having his throat cut.